All right, since today it's raining out, I figured I'd just make a video here at my shop and talk about C.A.R.B, California Air Resources Board. And so what we'll do is we'll talk about some of the good things that they have done. And then later in the video, we'll talk about some of the reasons why maybe at this point, they've kind of exhausted what they started with. And maybe it's time to move on to other things. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoy the video. Make sure you like it. Let's see your comments. I'd like to see what you guys to say. I'm sure there's going to be some good ones down there. So anyway, let's begin. Back in the 80s, 70s and 80s, in Southern California, we had a serious smog problem. I mean, I was a kid. I used to go to school back then, and we would have like our recess or PE or whatever later in life, and they would have to make it so you just couldn't go outside because the smog was really so bad at that point that what would happen is we'd have these stage 3 and stage 4 smog alerts. And when you were outside for any period of time, doing any kind of activity or anything, what would happen is when you breathe in deep, so like if I breathe in really deep, your lungs would hurt. And it was really, really extremely bad for everyone's health. And that was the whole reason for the C.A.R.B establishment and also the A.Q.M.D, Air Quality Management District. C.A.R.B is California Air Resources Board. And so they came up with emissions equipment that was better than the federal standards. And back then, I guess at that point, we kind of needed something like that because you had this central valley where you have this valley that goes all the way around. You have the ocean breeze that blows in, and then it would blow all the air into Riverside and San Bernardino counties, and they would be just full of this heavy smog. So it was really bad. Well, after about 10 years, 10 or 20 years of tweaking things, getting better, we got into around 2000, and there was no more stage 3 and stage 4 smog alerts. So it did a good thing in the beginning and got rid of a lot of the smog that we have. Well, what's happened now is it seems like they started going after other things. They went after paint fumes and things like that, trying to lower them. And now, let me ask you this. What do you think? I mean, I don't know what the actual numbers are, and I don't know if I trust the ones that they give us because it seems like they seem to be a little bit spun, the numbers that they give us. Like there are some statistics. Statistics can be manipulated, you guys. We all know this, and you can use different studies and come up with information to spin it however you want. So what do you really think in paint emissions? How much percentage of that is actually even measurable? I'm going to guess it's less than 1%. I'm going to think it's less than 0.5%. You guys tell me in the comments below what you think, because I think it's very, very low. So they went after paint emissions. They started doing this stuff with, federal emissions weren't good enough. We might make them cleaner here. And then, which was, not a terribly bad thing, I guess, but then they started going for even more things. They started, investigating aerosol cans, all kinds of things that became illegal, and they started doing it all over the state of California instead of just in this AQMD area. So at this point now, they're following this thing called zero emissions. Now, listen, there's no such thing as zero. So a guy goes, listen, I've got an electric car and my car is zero emissions. Okay, the car itself today, after it's manufactured, sitting there, may have zero emissions. But let's look at the whole picture. And I think this is what they're not doing, and it's to purposely follow a political agenda. And I don't think it's any longer has anything to do with actual emissions, and it's become used for politics. And that was not the intent of the whole thing. In fact, they apply every so often, I don't know how often, for a federal approval, and I think it should at this point be revoked, and I'll explain to you why. So they say it's a zero emissions car. Well, let's look at the whole picture. And I'm not against electric cars. I think electric cars are great, and I think that they do lower the total footprint over, let's say, 10 or 15-year period, however long they last. I don't really know. The thing is, nobody's really done these studies. In fact, if they did, then we might have a clearer picture on what they actually do. So the electric car, if they took all the emissions that it takes to manufacture it, okay, all the emissions it takes to manufacture, and they took also the emissions that it makes over time, whatever, even like tire emissions and all that, because the tires wear out more, and all that stuff over the 10-year period, and then you have your demolition emissions. Now, some people will say all electric cars, when they demolition them, the battery waste is really huge. Like Volkswagen, kind of a little fan here on Volkswagens, but they actually have a battery in their car that's 100% recyclable. Now, I want to ask this question to those guys who manufacture that. How much emissions does it take to demanufacture that battery? Okay, or demolition it. Okay, so if we take the whole period of time from the date we manufacture it to the date we actually destroy it, and all those emissions during that time, okay, that are made over the lifetime of the car, those are real emissions. They're not, zero, okay? Because to manufacture an electric car, it definitely does make more emissions than manufacturing a gasoline or diesel car. So let's look at the whole picture. And that's what I want to say is they're not doing. So they're pushing something called zero emissions agenda. And I think the zero emissions agenda may or may not be really what they think. And I don't think it's zero, that's for sure. And the other thing is they're doing this for paint. They're doing this for like your house paint. Well, now your house paint doesn't last as long because it's the zero emissions paint. And so you have to do it more often. Well, you got to have a guy go out with an airless sprayer and spray it. You're using electric power, and you're using, gasoline or diesel cars that go back and forth to work or whatever. And those are all emissions. Okay, let's look at the whole picture. If it lasts half as long, you got to paint it twice as often, and the VOCs are only 50 parts per million, which is almost nothing, okay? And they want you to use a zero emissions paint, which maybe it doesn't last as long. Let's look at the whole picture. And this is what I think that is missing today, is they're not looking at the whole picture. There's other things that the AQMD area is doing as well, and C.A.R.B is doing as well. So they said, like Gavin Newsom says, hey, we don't want to drill, and I don't know how he's involved with this stuff, and I also think it's very politicized, and it's not actually being done to lower emissions. I think it's done to push an agenda. And is it a good agenda? Is it actually an agenda that has merit? Nobody really can say specifically by data, by numbers, that it is. And I want to see actual numbers. That's what I want to see. I want to see what is the total footprint of emissions from the date you manufacture a Tesla or electric car to the date it's demolition. I think that it is still less over the time, but there's also things that it's not for everyone, and pushing it on everyone I don't think is a good idea either. So first of all, that's what I think we need to be doing, And as long as C.A.R.B. is, bending the rules to meet whatever they want, then I think that they're just, I don't know, are they really doing a better thing, or are they just pushing an agenda? And if they're pushing an agenda, I don't think they should be eligible for the federal licensing. I think it's time to let them go. And you guys can share your comments about this. Of course, you can have your opinion. And this video is my opinion. This is based on the information that I know, and maybe I'm completely wrong. So, of course, you can make comments below, and it's completely up to you. So another thing that I was going to tell you about Gavin Newsom with oil supply. And so we have all this oil supply in California. And what they do is they said, well, to bring that oil out of the ground, it makes emissions. And we don't want to make as much emissions. So we're going to take less of our own oil that we have on our lands in California. And we would rather go to Venezuela or Chile, because what I understand, they have to have oil that has the same viscosity as the local oil that we have in order for the refineries to work. So I don't know specifically that they come from those two countries, but I've heard Venezuela, and I believe it's also Chile that we have to get our oil from. Maybe I'm wrong again. You can look that up for yourself. So when we get this, we have to get this oil and then have it put on a ship, okay, and drug all the way up here from South America. Does that not make emissions? Last time I checked, I thought that those ships made a lot of emissions. In fact, there's very little emission controls on them, as far as I know. Maybe there isn't any. And we bring those into our ports, and apparently when there's so many miles out from shore, we don't count those emissions that those ships make. Maybe we should. Maybe we should. If we're really trying to do something to lower emissions, global emissions, let's look at the total footprint. And I can tell you, I pretty much am going to tell you that I think it's probably better if we just get our own oil. Wouldn't you guys agree? You tell me what you think. And also, we're supporting Venezuela. It's like, is that a great country that's doing the right things for their people? Aren't they like a little shady? I don't know. You guys can comment below about that, because again, that's something I don't know anything about. Okay, so that's another thing about C.A.R.B, and I believe it's A.Q.M.D. also is involved in that stuff. And I think I don't know. I think the federal government needs to really look at this stuff and decide, what these things are really doing. Is zero emissions, and same thing with the natural gas. They're going after that now, and they're saying, oh, we should get rid of natural gas. You talk about these fires, okay, and pumps all running on electric power, and all of a sudden they shut off the electric power. So how do the pumps get, pumping water, okay, when I don't know if this happened, okay, I don't know. I'm speculating a little bit. Were those pumps in the, what's it called, the ones that that they weren't having enough water pressure during the fires? Were those run on electric power? Nobody's really talked about that yet. In fact, some other areas in the state they went through hoops after hoops after hoops to get natural gas powered pumps to have dual fuel. So they have them run on diesel or natural gas or electric power, 3 different fuels. And, to be able to accommodate, being able to work during a time when they might shut off power for a fire. So, are these things, and so now you gotta factor in the fire emissions, okay? So yeah, you saved on the natural gas, but then we have this giant plume of smoke from these fires. What's the total footprint? That's what we need to be looking at. I think that C.A.R.B is just not doing that anymore, and I think it's just time to defund them. I think it's time to just say, you know what? You guys did a great job in the beginning. You did a good job, you know, bringing emissions down. But I think right now they're just chasing after zero. And there's no such thing. And let's get out of denial. Let's get out of denial and stop realizing that realize that there's no such thing as zero. Let's look at the actual amounts that we're saving, if it is anything, and let's come up with some better solutions. So anyway, I just thought I'd make a video on this subject. I know some people are going to be not so happy about it, and some people are going to be like, this is a great idea. Yeah, of course, there's a comment section below. Be sure to share those comments that you think. And all right, I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Please like, share, and subscribe.